This is Mark Sobowitz with a Clarion Voice. Today we're going to try something a little bit different beyond the interviews and my personal videos. Today we're going to have a discussion about the freedom of religion. And Mike Donaldson is here to join me in that discussion. And thank you, Mike, for being here. We appreciate that. And so basically, the freedom of religion was in the First Amendment of the Constitution. And so that was established in December 15th, 1791. And it basically says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religious or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So, the Constitution guarantees the free observance of religion and prevents the government from ever establishing a state church. So my question is, are we headed in that direction, or are we still free to express ourselves with whatever we do religious-wise?
I think it depends on what the church is going to allow.
Okay.
I don't see the national church or something that's controlled by the government, like what they were, what they were under when they were under British rule, and why they left that in the first place, and why we came here to America and got our own freedom from that. But I don't see that happening. But the church is can be fickle. And from different interviews, like I know that you've had here, it seemed to me that there's obviously different views. Some say, hey, we ought to just do exactly what the government tells us to do, the way the government tells us to do it, and the time it tells us, and,
right.
The amount of people, because you know what I'm talking about, And then there's others saying, no. And I think, my personal opinion, which is more of a libertarian view, is that you ought to be able to do what you want to do, which is what we're more of a republic. We are a republic, not a democracy. Like people say, oh, yeah, but what about democracy? Okay, we are a republic. And there's a difference there. In a republic, you when it comes to liberty, the government is there to do thus and so, to protect, to protect you at borders, things of this sort. And the reason why they put these laws together, or Bill of Rights, was to say, we don't want to turn into what we came from.
Okay, that makes sense, but there's one problem. The pandemic that we've been experiencing has created somewhat, in certain people's views, limitations on how they're worshiping. Basically,
right.
Not being able to sing inside because it's going to create more of a problem. With people being exposed if you don't have any mask on. So I think that there, somehow or another, even though the government is not supposed to be involved in dictating to churches or mosque or synagogues or whatever, how they're supposed to worship, somehow or another, I think that they're getting to that point somewhat, at least in my opinion, because although churches have managed to find their way around it and be able to worship effectively, like at my home church, at Legacy Church, our pastor Garrett Cruz, who I interviewed last week, has developed a plan where he has the sermon inside and worship outside, which complies with what the Assembly of God, wants him to do. So people have, it just seems to me that the government is getting more involved in dictating to churches what they're supposed to be doing as far as worship is concerned. Now, here's something that's really scary. I found in doing a little research on this, the Supreme Court has said that the federal government may limit religious freedom not only when it has a compelling interest to do so in order to protect the common good and limit people's ability to harm others. Now, to me, that scares me to death because I think that that may be where we may be headed. I don't know, but it seems like if that's something that the Supreme Court has said, then what's to stop them or stop state or federal governments from doing that?
Exactly. It's going to come down to how do we define that terminology, that which you just spoke. Who is going to say, well, this is, we're protecting people, if your church, right, is harming people in such a way where it's, there's some churches that have harmed children, and they thought, oh, well, this is okay, to raise a child in the group to a certain age, and then the leader of that group, has sex with them. Okay, that's harming. I mean, that's an obvious harm. They're going to say if you don't wear a mask. Well, see, I agree in the beginning. I mean, all of us were like, what the heck is this? And, how did it get here? And remember, it was the bat stew flu,
Right.
But, that wasn't true. And then it was, you have to do this and you don't worry about doing that. And especially with masks. I mean, now they're saying it's somewhere between 70.5% up to 85% of the people who contracted COVID actually wore a mask religiously. Speaking of religion.
Yes, right.
And they still got the disease.
Right.
So we've learned so much, what is the risk of not wearing one? Well, it's not too great. It's 30%.
Okay. Well, what about the issue about where you have a separation of state and government and church? Yeah, church and state. It seems to me that the state is sort of pushing the envelope a little bit as far as telling the churches what they can and cannot do, and I don't think that the government has any right to do that. I mean, because the churches, it's like not trusting the churches to do the right thing. I mean, okay, John MacArthur in Southern California in his church was told that if you have a gathering of 7,000 people, which is the amount that's in his church,
right,
that you would be fined or whatever the penalty was. That was going to be issued to him. And John MacArthur said, no way, we're still going to worship.
Right.
So I really think that somehow or another, people in government, whatever level it happens to be, is taking advantage of their power and then also the emotional aspects of the pandemic and saying, you can't do this. Granted, people wearing masks, like you said, may have still contracted, the coronavirus, but they could have underlying symptoms, for example, which is possible. And then there's no reason to think that, okay, maybe they still did get, the coronavirus, even though they wore the mask. So I don't discount that because I don't have any, scientific proof to say, medical proof to say one way or the other. My bone of contention is that the government is encroaching too much on the churches and dictating to it based on what I read from what the Supreme Court is saying. I mean, it could get down to the point, if it gets any worse, that the government is going to, say, well, you can't worship at all, period.
Yeah. Well, it could be that worse. It could get that bad. Like I say, as we have learned more and more and more, one would think that the federal government would okay, let's just start from here. most people think the federal government is going to protect me. They wouldn't do anything bad,
Right.
right,
Yes.
to me because, we pay taxes and that's their job, is to protect me. And they wouldn't do anything that would harm me in any way, shape, or form, would they? And here's when the information comes out, and this is why this is kind of why it's been so murky and why they only focusing on certain things. Okay, so we're talking like only people, for all the deaths that have happened, and they're saying it's over 220,000. Now they're looking at the actual numbers and looking at the actual sheets because they're incentivized. They get more money from the federal government. This was approved by the Congress, okay? So this is Nancy Pelosi and the Congress approved of paying them a little bit more for COVID stuff, I don't know if they're thinking if it's hazard pay or what, but actually people who have died from COVID is 9,000.
From actual
from
COVID
just
symptoms.
COVID.
Okay.
And the reason for that, it's for obvious reasons because they get a lot of money for it. Okay. But COVID is not a death sentence. And I think the church has missed this whole clue. It depends upon your eternal perspective.
Right.
If I'm so afraid of this, that I might die. Why is that a bad thing if you're a Christian? If you're so secure in your relationship with God that it doesn't matter, you could drink poison, as the Bible says. You could handle deadly snakes.
Right.
Get bit by a snake and still live, by a poisonous snake. Well, say if you died. Oh, to be absent in the body is to be home with the Lord. Why aren't we just rejoicing in that? But the church seems to be so afraid of two things. One, dying, which kind of confuses me. And two, disappointing or going against the federal government.
Yeah, I think that if the foundation of their faith is strong enough, I agree with how John MacArthur approached it in his church, and there are other people, other pastors across the country who have done similar things in defiance of, the government's order. And I think that, somehow or another, it just seems to me that people shouldn't be afraid of the federal government if their faith is strong enough to withstand that, because Pep Roby said in his interview last week about the fact that even though the church is, being harassed or whatever, persecuted, that the church will thrive as a result of that.
Well, yeah, because you're going to get persecuted anyway.
Right.
Right.
Yes, and I think that people have to reevaluate their faith, especially with thinking eternally. Mm-hmm. If they're not afraid of eternal life and recognizing the fact that that's what we're all about, as far as being in the book of life,
right,
then this shouldn't be an issue as far as where you observe your faith. Granted, okay, the church is only a building. The people are the church.
Correct.
Okay, so maybe they're making too much of this. You can worship anywhere and it'll be a church. It could be considered a quote-unquote church. Rick Comstock said, that if he was still in the pastorate, that he would, go and find somebody that has property, acreage or whatever, and worship out there. So, there are ways around it. The thing that just gets my goat is the fact that the government thinks it has the right to dictate to churches, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, as far as worshiping is concerned. And that disturbs me. On the other hand, I do agree with what you're saying about a person's faith and reevaluating that and recognizing, wait a minute, what am I afraid of? The Lord is on my side. That's what it says in the Psalms. The Lord is on my side. I will not fear. And so why should people fear the coronavirus?
Yeah.
They shouldn't. I mean, granted, they have to take, precautions, to prevent, getting, sick. And sometimes people get exposed to that but don't have the symptoms. They just have to be quarantined because they were exposed to somebody else, And so I think that there is a knee-jerk reaction to all of this.
Yeah. But it also seems to be holding the church in fear. That's what bugs me. You're holding the whole nation captive to fear. And we're not a fear-based people,
Right.
As the Bible says, we're a peculiar people. And what's so strange about these people, they don't react to fear. They don't live in fear. They have faith. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think that people, need to take a step back and reevaluate what they, are about. Because when Mike Garman was here to be interviewed, and we talked about that survey about the fact that people in the church didn't even think that Jesus was God to begin with. For example,
that was crazy.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think that all of this is being blown out of proportion.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think, what do we do about it? I think that's the next question.
Well, yes. I mean, because my concern is that the statement that I read about the Supreme Court, the government could decide, okay, by worshiping in church with, more than 10 people, for example, if that's going to cause harm, they can shut down the church.
Yeah.
As a result, but
what is wonderful about living in this area, we have a district attorney here,
right,
that is for us.
Yes.
Thank you, Dan Dow.
Yes, absolutely.
And has declared this a worship sanctuary.
That's true. He did.
And he will not persecute, any church not following, these crazy mandates.
Right.
And I think that's very honorable,
Well, I think it took a lot of courage for him to do and stand out. I mean, I was watching a sermon that was given by a service by First Baptist Church a few weeks ago, and he appeared with his family. Really? And he didn't give a talk, but Mike Garman, the pastor there, honored him because of his stand. And you're right. We are lucky that we live in this, in this area because of people like that and their stand that they're taking. But I'm concerned about the rest of the country as far as religious freedoms are concerned, and whether or not the government is going to step in and use their so-called power to say, well, you can't do this. So
yeah, today is the 28th.
Yes.
28th of
October. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have an election
next week, right?
So I don't know. I think we ought to do this again on the 4th.
True. That's true. We should, but it's just really interesting. Now, granted, we are told to respect the government. The Bible clearly indicates that.
That's true.
So, fine, we can respect the government. However, we can be creative as far as worship is concerned, even if the government does say that you can't worship with more than 10 people or whatever, even if that is the ruling, we can still find creative ways to, get around that
Yeah.
and still have worship.
Well, I agree, but the whole thing about having an elected official is not only it was, first of all, they represent you. Okay, if they represent me, this is how I feel. This is what I believe. This, and if you have enough collective voices that say this is how we believe, or this is what we want to happen, then they're supposed to represent those facts and feelings. It's not supposed to be the other way around, where they are mandating things that we don't want to see happen. And
Right.
and I think that when that cart gets before the horse, and you feel the pressure, then you need to push back, because it's not supposed to be there.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is our little input about religious freedom, or the freedom of religion, however you want to phrase it. If you have any comments about our discussion, we welcome your input. And so if you will be kind enough to send your emails to clarionvoice@gmail.com, and we will be happy to respond to that. But for now, that's A Clarion Voice. Thank you, Mike, for having this discussion with me. And we appreciate everybody that is watching. And if you like this video, share it with someone, and like and subscribe. And until next time, this is Mark Sobowitz with A Clarion Voice.